everyone. It's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elizabeth Alfano. It's great to have you with me. It's Tuesday, and I have got your number. So I'm very excited to have you, a great guest with me today. She is the founder and executive director of the Plant-Based Foods Association. Michele Simon, thanks for being with me.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So let me just quickly sing your praises. You have 20 years of experience in food and beverage law and policy, and you are also the author of Appetite for Profit, How the Food Industry Undermines Our Health and How to Fight Back. We're going to get into fighting back in just a second. But for those who maybe don't know about the Plant-Based Food Association, perhaps you can tell us what it's all about and why you started it in 2015.
Sure, happy to. So I had made my career really shining a light on the dark side of the food industry for many years, writing about companies like McDonald's and Coca-Cola and Kraft Foods and just companies that were really not quite doing the right thing. And I got a little bit tired of that and decided there was an opportunity to take all I had learned about how food companies lobby, but put that work to good use with the plant-based food companies. So I had been vegetarian, mostly vegan for a long time and just realized, hey, this is a great way to combine my personal passion with my professional experience. And so it was with that in mind that I pulled together the leadership that launched the organization formally in early 2016. So it's been really great to be able to be in this place at the right time.
Yes, and most definitely we'll get into that. You certainly are in the right place at the right time. Your membership, which in total has almost 300 members, but it's really about 170 of them that are food companies that are members. I'm wondering what you're seeing now in particular due to COVID. We've had such a rush of plant-based sales. So what you're seeing in general and with COVID that are the biggest challenges for plant-based food companies.
Sure. Well, our work at PPFF, and we have grown, like you said, now to about 170 member companies, kind of splits into two main areas. One is the policy arena, and the other is the marketplace. So, the challenges we've met in the policy arena are mostly around labeling issues. The meat and dairy industry is not liking about how some of our food companies are labeling their foods. We can get more into that, but I would say on the business side, that's the other focus that we have, really helping our members succeed in the marketplace. And, there's always sort of fight for shelf space, really, at retail. So that has continued now with just even more, entrance into the market and so forth. I'll say in the food service arena, where we also try to help our members, of course, that has been particularly a challenge now as people are eating from home. So companies that are selling their products through the retail sector are doing very well, at least the ones that have been in that sector for a while. The ones that are relying a lot on restaurants and college universities obviously are hurting more. And then we also have a lot of members who are in the startup phase of their business growth. And so, for them, just trying to get into a retailer has been a real challenge as retailers. So there are no trade shows. First of all of our trade shows this year have been canceled. So that's obviously a real challenge for companies to just get in front of buyers that they used to be able to see at trade shows. Some are willing to have conversations remotely and they can send samples and so forth. But we're just in a place right now with the association of really trying to help our members get through this particularly challenging period. So we're working with them on resources related to online selling, for example, and really helping them, if they're not already selling online, ramp up that part of their operation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So kind of reinvent themselves a little bit and go direct to consumer, which is not as easy as it sounds, requires a whole website reconfiguration, et cetera, to be able to do that. And shipping constraints and issues, something that has been really interesting to me. So I'll read this from the Food Business News. Retail sales of plant-based alternatives formulated to replace conventional meat, dairy, eggs, and seafood products surged by 90% in mid-March compared to the prior year period, according to new data from the Plant-Based Food Association and SPINS. And then during the 4 weeks following the peak of panic buying, plant-based food sales increased 27%, still outpacing retail food sales in general by 35%. So we've been seeing a lot of news about how plant-based has fared well as people reconsider their meat choices during these COVID times. And yet at the same time, I've interviewed so many people on this show who have said their relationship with the grocery store is better than before because they're there in a pinch to fill those shelves when meat isn't there, but that they're feeling that the grocery stores are not wanting to reinvent the wheel when they themselves are, crushed during this time of COVID. So they haven't said that they've been selling more per se. And yet I know that there are more sales happening. So I wonder if any of your members have talked to you about their relationships with the grocery store owners and if they're, forging a better relationship because they've been there for them at this time.
Absolutely. There's no question about it that the companies that, already had good relationships can only build on those positive relationships by being able to give the retailers what they need to provide the consumer with extra product right now and so forth. There's also an opportunity to say, hey, try this particular product. We know it's going to sell well. Maybe if another, variety is out that particular week. And so I think there's been a lot of positive relationships, formed and built upon by being able to give retailers what they need right now to keep their customers happy.
Yes, most definitely. This is going to sound strange because when someone said this to me, I was like, are you sure? But I did have a business on this show that said that they feel that maybe there's almost too much competition in the plant-based burger space and that they feel that maybe they see a saturation point coming. And I'm wondering if you can tell me about the growing competition in the plant-based space and if you see any points of saturation.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about there's the industry as a whole, right? And then there's particular lines or, specialties. And I would say as far as, say, the burger goes, there's no question there are a lot of companies that are seeing the success of, a company like Beyond Meat and want to, be part of that picture, and who can blame them? And so, I think it's normal and natural for there to be more competition in a particular category. I mean, there isn't one meat company making burgers, right? There's lots of meat companies making burgers. So I don't see any problem there. And then when you go out from there, from that one type of, meat to all meat alternatives, to all dairy alternatives. I mean, the dairy, you walk down the dairy yogurt aisle and it's just yards and yards,
Yes.
So it's kind of funny to me to worry about, I don't know, maybe there's half a dozen companies making coconut yogurt. Really? Have you seen how many companies are making, cow's milk yogurt? So, I think it's important to keep it in perspective and realize, we have a long way to go to, even come close to the scale of the meat and dairy industries. And there's plenty of room for more quote unquote competition, when it comes from the plant-based sector.
Yeah. And I want to talk about competition because ultimately that's what a free market is all about. And in theory, we believe in this in the United States. So let's get into that a little bit. The Plant-Based Food Association does so many things, but you're really strong in lobbying to ensure that plant-based companies can use words like milk and meat so that they can communicate accurately to the consumer who can thus buy it. And there can be some kind of even playing field, if we want to use that expression, or fair competition. I'm wondering if you can explain your work in that area of labeling, because it's been so powerful and hit the headlines quite a bit.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, I would say it's definitely the policy issue that's helped put us on the map, got us a lot of attention in the media, and got a lot of members to realize the value that we bring. And it was, pretty much what I saw was going to be needed. In other words, collective action to defend this industry against what was inevitably going to be an attack from the milk lobby and from the meat lobby. And so, it's basically a sign of success, right? When your competition is feeling that threatened that they have to go after you this way. But it's really quite silly. Right. I mean, we've had certainly soy milk, almond milk for decades, and it is something that the milk lobby has been trying in vain to, get FDA to step in and say that these companies can't use the word milk. Well, it's way too late for that. And so, but yeah, we still have to fight that fight, and we have been at the federal level and now at the state level. The meat lobby has sort of taken a page from the milk lobby and seen that the milk lobby has failed, and this effort to try and stop the use of the word milk on products like almond milk, and so have really come on in a much bigger way, particularly at the state level, to try and get bills passed to not allow terms like meat and beef and chicken to be used on plant-based alternatives. And so we've had to wage quite a bit of a defensive attack, if you will, really just being on the defensive to stop these bills from passing. And I'm happy to say, because of our efforts and collaboration with colleagues, we have been able to stop almost all of these bills from passing, with a few exceptions. And where there are exceptions that are able to get through because of the particular political situation in that state, we've worked with, again, our collaborators to file lawsuits to challenge these laws in court, because there's no question that they are unconstitutional. They violate the First Amendment rights of our members to use plain English terms that consumers understand. So, we are advocating for our members, whether it's in the legislature, in the marketplace, and ultimately even in the court system where we have to.
Yes. And maybe we can go over one example of that so we can give folks some history. I know when we were talking before the show, we were talking about Oklahoma, but I also want to talk a little bit, if you can, about the success. Before we talk about Oklahoma, which we'll get into this, folks, but something just passed into law there that the Plant-Based Food Association is taking head on. But you had a nice success, I think, with Upton's Naturals, I want to say, in Mississippi. Is that right?
Right.
Where you got them to change. Go ahead and explain it for us.
Sure. So last year we fought in over half the states that had introduced bills along these lines, mostly to not allow meat terms to be used on these types of products. And, we thought that was silly. And so we teamed up with Upton's Naturals and with lawyers from the Institute of Justice, which is a libertarian law firm that offers its services pro bono, which is great because they don't typically care about, a vegan way of eating, but they do care about the First Amendment and they care about small business. And so with the leadership from Upton's, we filed this lawsuit against the state of Mississippi, basically saying that their law banning these terms was unconstitutional. And, they had started down this road of trying to write regulations to fix this law, but they didn't do it in the right way. And so we helped them do it the right way. And we said, okay, if you're going to have regulations, then this is how to write it. These are the exceptions to use, the qualifiers. This is work that PPFA has done for years to explain how we actually have voluntary labeling guidelines that we provide to our members to suggest how to label products in a way that's clear and consistent. And so, with that as the basis, they were able to amend their regulations to allow for the proper qualifiers like plant-based, vegetarian, vegan, et cetera, so that would be what companies were able to do, like no-brainer, common sense. Yeah. And so we were very happy to come to that agreement with the state of Mississippi.
Well, so that's interesting to me because it sounds like the state of Mississippi was willing to play ball, if you will. They were willing to kind of meet you in the middle, see the logic, and really put the consumer first. I'm wondering if all states want to play that way, or if they're heavily influenced by meat and dairy who maybe don't want a level playing field. Perhaps there's more resistance depending on the lobby history in that state. Would that be accurate?
Well, I think there are different factors at play depending on the state we're talking about. So, the state of Mississippi obviously had a strong meat lobby to get the bill passed. Sure. But then when it came to our filing a lawsuit, we were no longer dealing with the meat lobby. Right? At that point, we were dealing with the lawyers who have to defend this indefensible law. And so, at that point, lawyers have to come in and say, oh, gee, do we really want to fight this in court when probably the judge is not going to be on our side? And so that's when cooler heads tend to prevail, when lawyers get involved and, it kind of takes the politics out of it, or at least puts it a bit to the side. And so that's why we were able to prevail ultimately there.
So that makes a lot of sense. So maybe you can explain to people what's going on right now, very recent in Oklahoma with HB 3806. It was just passed into law. Is it the same situation? Can't use the words meat and dairy?
Yeah, similar situation. So the good news, if there is good news on the policy front this year, because of the COVID situation, many states have been out of session, understandably distracted with perhaps some more important things than, what's on a label of a veggie burger, with a few exceptions. So Oklahoma, unfortunately, probably had a bill already, in the works. And so they decided to pass their version of this law, which for them, and each state handles it a little bit differently. The language, there isn't really a common, model bill. There's different language depending on the state and depending on the lobbyists and the lawmakers involved. So what Oklahoma decided to do was say, okay, you can use qualifiers, but they have to be as large a font size as the meat term, which is just also silly because, companies don't like to have their hands tied that way. I mean, no one's telling, the meat companies what font size their labels should be in. It's quite ridiculous for plant-based companies to have to adhere to some kind of font, random font regulations. And so, so we don't like that bill either. And so we're now, looking at potential litigation either through our team or with some of our colleagues. So, there's no question that bill also will be found unconstitutional, or rather, there's no question that bill is unconstitutional, and that if we threaten to sue or do sue, that hopefully, again, cooler heads will prevail and will come to a reasonable resolution. So another state that's happening right now is the state of Georgia, where we also thought, they had kind of gone away, but they came back. And somehow this rose to the top of the priority list in the state of Georgia. That bill would have also banned meat terminology, but we have been able to get some amendments attached to that bill language, similar to what we were talking about earlier, which is allowing qualifiers, which, by the way, other states such as Wyoming have also adopted in the past. So, we're willing to say, look, if you want to pass this bill, at least allow for qualifiers. That's what the law in general allows for, and that's what we, again, at PPFA have, suggested to our members. And that's what most of them are doing anyway, right? I mean, no one wants to fool anyone. The whole conversation is ridiculous because companies want to reach consumers who are looking for these alternatives. So they want to be clear as day that that's what they are. And so we're hopeful about the state of Georgia, again, coming to their senses and adopting this kind of qualifying language.
Yeah, it is very interesting because ultimately it is a consumer interest to be able to know what they're buying. And I don't think anybody is confused that when it's vegan meat alternative or vegan, hamburger meat or whatever the phrase might be, that if you've got vegan or plant-based or non-dairy in front of it, if you've got that qualifier, I don't think anyone's really tricked or fooled. And ultimately they want to know what they're buying. So as you were saying, it comes down to a freedom of speech really issue. So very interesting. But I think one of your members, Tofurky, is still, do I have this right? Are they still in the midst of lawsuits with Arkansas about the term sausage? So not just meat or dairy, but the term sausage. And I think they're fighting that with the ACLU. Is that right?
Right. So going back 2 years ago, and the first state to pass a law was actually Missouri. And as a result of that law passing, similar law banning meat terms, they're all very similar. They're just banning meat terms in general, whatever they are. And so Tofurky is the main plaintiff in an ongoing lawsuit in the state of Missouri, again, filed 2 years ago now, with the ACLU and the Good Food Institute and the Animal Legal Defense Fund. So that lawsuit's continuing. And then last year, that same group came together to file a lawsuit in the state of Arkansas. And they just had a very positive judge decision regarding their preliminary injunction, essentially agreeing that the law should not go into effect because the judge agreed that it appeared that this law would likely to be found ultimately unconstitutional. So that was a really great decision that we've all been building upon to share it with other states considering this and saying, okay, look, now we've got some pretty clear court guidance here about what's going on. So those are the two other lawsuits that, yes, Tofurky is the lead plaintiff on. And then, we'll be filing others probably this year if we have to.
So the fight is on. It's interesting. I don't know if you can comment on this. Obviously, your members are primarily businesses. About 170 are plant-based food businesses in your Plant-Based Food Association membership. But I'm wondering if you have a sense for, this is a global general discussion. Of course, you don't know personally, but we see consumer preferences shifting, changing. We talked about the numbers of, plant-based foods being up 90% this March over last March. And even post-panic buying, the plant-based foods continue to be up. But in addition to their health preferences, let's assume that they're, thinking about health, maybe the planet, maybe animals, but primarily health usually. Are they also starting to see, COVID-19, this wet market issue? Of course, you don't know the answer personally, so I'm just wondering your personal perspective. Are they starting to question their meat for other reasons, like these labeling laws, which really aren't consumer forward, or, slaughterhouses having workers that are sick and really not taking the necessary safety precautions? It's like the list is starting to get long. COVID-19, meat-borne pandemics come from eating meat, et cetera. I could go on. And you don't know personally, having not spoken to every person in the United States, but I'm wondering if you're starting to see not just consumer preferences for health, but this general consumer shift away from the global benefits of meat.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's hard to answer with data, right? Because we know that the sales are up. We don't have, say, consumer data on exactly why. And so, one of the big questions that's come up with reporters following the meat factory breakouts of COVID has been, are consumers, you say, exchanging animal meat for plant-based, and that's certainly possible, right? I mean, the meat alternatives are tasting better all the time, and it makes sense that for someone who maybe, either is bothered by what's going on with those outbreaks, or just, perhaps in certain stores where they're limiting purchase of animal meat, in some places they may even be out. We're happy to have our member companies sort of fill in that gap. I think the question is, because at some point the meat supply will probably get back to normal, and so we hope that those consumers who maybe are trying something new for the first time will sustain that shift, and time will tell. But the main thing that we do know is that plant-based meat and dairy products were already on the rise, like before.
I think you have frozen. Maybe I'm just going to wait this out, folks. Maybe she's going to pop back in. It looks like her internet. There you are. Your internet took out, but you're back.
Sorry about that. All right. So I was saying that our previous to COVID numbers showed that plant-based sales were up 11% over the previous year. And food sales in general were pretty flat at just 2% growth. So right there, it shows you that plant-based is already a growth industry. Right. And so there's no reason that that's going to change. Post-COVID, it's probably only going to increase even more. And so we're pretty, inspired by that. And for whatever reason, people, like you said, a lot of people are motivated by their health. Perhaps some people are, eyes are sort of opening up to the grim realities of industrial meat production. And of course, the awful way that workers are treated in these slaughterhouses. And so, I feel pretty good about our members really providing that alternative. And I can tell you, the conversations that I hear from some of our members who are very mindful of the fact that there's a lot of pressure being put on them right now. Like we were talking about earlier, this idea of companies keeping up with demand and making sure that they are providing retailers with, keeping their shelf stocked. But our members aren't going to do that while they put their workers at risk, right? So if it's a choice between making sure, shelves are stocked at Walmart or making sure their workers are safe, they're going to choose in favor of their workers, which is obviously a very different story than we're hearing from the meat companies right now in their slaughterhouses and what's going on, where they're not even, providing proper equipment, not doing the proper testing, not alerting their workers to what's going on. I mean, it's, parade of horribles. And so I just feel really proud right now to be working for an industry that doesn't just care about, giving people the meat alternatives, but actually cares holistically about how they do business, about their workers, about paying them a living wage, about, engaging in sustainable practices across the board. And so that's a really important aspect, I think, that sometimes gets lost. And we're just talking about, like comparing, say, an Impossible Burger to a regular burger. Like, I just think we need to be thinking much more broadly and not reducing comparisons down to, calories and fat grams. It's the whole picture of how these two industries are operating so differently.
I love that you say this. And as you say, there's no data yet, but I too seem to be in a lot of conversations. This is anecdotally at dinner parties, because we are starting to get out now and be a little bit more social, or even on my Zoom calls, where people who are not necessarily plant-based or vegan, they're flexitarians, they kind of come in and out of it. They're a little veggie forward, but nothing major. And they're commenting on how this industry is really starting to turn them off, and they're reconsidering their purchases for their health, but also for these other global issues. Speaking of global issues, so it's been a very exciting time, and very soon we're going to have the dietary guidelines for Americans. It's the guidelines that will be for 2020 to 2025. And recently they were taking outside recommendations as to what they thought, that what they wanted to hear from the public, medical experts, et cetera, about any recommendations going forward for 2020 to 2025. I'm wondering if the Plant-Based Food Association did any commenting to the USDA for their upcoming guidelines, and what you think the outcome will be for the dietary guidelines for Americans 2020 to 2025.
Yeah. So this is the set of dietary recommendations that the federal government updates every 5 years. And, historically, they have been basically ignoring most of the science and perpetuating this myth that one needs to eat meat and dairy, not just every day, but several times a day. And I'm sorry to say not a lot has changed in the last few years. But yes, we did show up to have our say a few months back when everyone was still meeting in person, and there was an opportunity to give live comment, and so we sent our lobbyist and our consultant there to testify on behalf of our industry. And the good news is, first time I had seen, and I watched online, it was must have been 3 or 4 hours worth of, individuals getting up to speak to the committee. And it was incredible. Like, the showing for plant-based at this hearing was really something to see. I mean, of course, you had health professionals and experts of all sorts coming and really saying the science demands that we elevate plant-based foods over meat and dairy. And so, I think that's something we can all take part in. And even if, truth is, we're unlikely to see a lot of changes under the current administration, but it's all laying groundwork, right? It's all putting the building blocks in place for when change is ready to happen. And, we're certainly seeing all kinds of awareness and change happen right now with the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I just think that we shouldn't ever, give up on the fact that everything that we do, whether it's in the social justice realm and, our work related to improving our diets, every building block you put in place does lead to that point in time in history when people kind of wake up and go, oh yeah, they were right all along. And I'm already feeling that. I've been doing this work a long time. And so, I'm pretty hopeful for our future.
I am too. I do feel that we're just a domino two away before it all goes tumbling down. I exaggerate, but before you really see a carved out path for plant-based eating being very much part of the norm. So I can't wait for those dietary guidelines to come out. I really want to see if dairy in particular is going to be on that plate. In Canada, they moved it off the plate to like a side thought, potentially, basically kind of giving themselves a foot in each camp. But it'll be very interesting.
Dairy industry is pretty strong in this country. I saw that in Canada, and of course, it's very inspiring. I'm not anticipating that happening here. But I think it's also important to remember, while the dietary guidelines are important for a lot of our federal food programs, ultimately, it's what's happening in the marketplace that matters. So, and that's what we've been talking about, right? The consumer shift that's happening, regardless of what the federal government has to say about it. The consumers are waking up. And so, I think it's important not to get too discouraged by policies that, tend to stay in place or sometimes even take a step back, or fighting these stupid milk laws. I mean, the average consumer doesn't care about laws that are being passed in Mississippi or Georgia, right? They're just going out and buying their almond milk or their cashew milk or whatever milk they want to buy. So, that's what I always take solace in.
Yes, I think what you're saying is absolutely right. But I will say these USDA guidelines do affect what kids get in school, as I understand it. So in that sense, it is important when you consider, 65% of all Americans are lactose intolerant. That's higher with Asian Americans and African Americans. And yet dairy is the only option for them in school lunch programs. So yes, the almighty dollar. I always tell people on the show, you vote with your dollars. You don't have to go out on a corner and hold a sign and protest. You vote with your dollars 3 times a day, and you have enormous power because of your dollars. Both the federal government and all the companies, be it meat, dairy, or plant-based, they all want your dollars. You are incredibly powerful. Do not give up your power by just spending willy-nilly. Really focus on what you want to align with your values, because your dollars are so powerful. But not always the case in things like school programs, which I know the Plant-Based Food Association also lobbies. I'm not sure if that's the right term here, but you work towards getting plant-based options in schools.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the way I look at it is, and this is why at PPFA we have 2 main areas of program, right? One is policy, because we absolutely need the right policies in place to make the conditions right for our members to succeed. And we have our marketplace work, which sort of, was able to work directly with the gatekeepers to the consumer. In our case, it's forming partnerships with retailers and food service operators to make sure that there's, again, that smooth market, path to market for our members. We need both, absolutely. And regarding school food, what we have been doing in that arena has been mostly, again, at the state level, because, federal level is hard. But there have been, in the past, a handful of states that have been putting better rules into place to encourage schools, for example, by incentivizing schools with some extra money to be able to purchase a meat or dairy alternative. Because unfortunately, with so little money going to reimburse schools for school meals, it can be very challenging financially for a school to purchase, say, a meat or dairy alternative when, meat industry is able to compete on an unlevel playing field by getting their price point so much lower. So yes, we do work with our partners in trying to encourage more of that those types of policies at the state level.
Yeah, so let's get into that, because I think that's a big thing. We talk about this trying to have a level playing field or having unfair economic advantages. As you know, during COVID-19, not too long ago, I think it was a $16 billion bailout, I'll call it, for meat and dairy. These industries suffering, as they say, through COVID. And, you're not seeing any kind of support like that for meat, for plant-based businesses. And so this unlevel playing field, this not fair competition, which we espouse here theoretically in the United States. What do you think about the subsidies that just happened? And is the Plant-Based Food Association working on anything for plant-based foods or combating those kind of subsidies?
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, it's something that I've certainly written about a lot in my previous life, which is the many ways that the meat and dairy industries have an unfair advantage in the marketplace. And it's really due to decades of currying favor with the right policymakers, of putting policies in place, whether it's, the obvious one being subsidies, but even programs like the checkoff programs, which most people know by way of the generic advertising campaigns that we've seen over the years, like beef, it's what's for dinner, or the milk mustache campaigns, or milk does a body good. These are all generic advertising campaigns that are paid for by the meat and dairy industries, but they are government administered programs. So the federal government actually requires every member of those industries that are part of checkoff programs to put money into a big pot, which then goes to pay for these generic advertising programs. That keeps the mythology going around the need to consume meat and dairy every single day. So, that's something that obviously our industry doesn't have. Many, many ways that, the industry has curried favor and also consolidated over the years. So how crazy is it that four large meat companies control from like over 80% of the meat market, right? So while that the way that's a government policy is, the government has failed to enforce its own antitrust laws over the years, allowing that kind of insane consolidation to happen. And that's what allows prices to be so artificially low, because they can scale up and really put pressure on the entire supply chain. The chicken industry is completely integrated. And people who raise chickens for food are basically serfs of the companies like Tyson and Purdue. So we can go on and on about the craziness of the meat and dairy industries and how they have really rigged the system over the years. And so it does make it a lot harder for our members to compete, particularly on price. So what are we doing about it? Well, as you can imagine, it's no easy task to undo the many decades and the incredible power that these industries have. And so what we try to do is work where we can. So, for example, there have been efforts to reform the checkoff programs, and we've supported bills by Senator Cory Booker's office to try and shine a light to provide more transparency on the checkoff program so that they're not abused, because somehow that money that's supposed to be allocated to advertising magically gets spent on lobbying, which is a complete no-no for checkoff programs. Yes, it happens. There's been many scandals in the beef industry, the pork industry also, especially known for misusing those checkoff dollars. The egg industry has been caught red-handed, misusing the checkoff dollars for the wrong purposes. So, the more we can shine a light on these practices, the hopefully less likely those abuses will happen. But those are the kinds of ways that we're trying to have a voice. But mainly, what we can do is ensure that the companies that we represent are able to access the marketplace. And so, thinking about competition with the meat industry in the marketplace, I want to just point out one thing that's really exciting that is sort of a counterweight, if you will, to the massive subsidies and unfair ways that the meat industry competes with our industry. Thinking about the marketplace in the meat section, right? And how, and mostly still, and certainly all in the past, the vegetarian set, if you will, would be in the produce aisle or sometimes in the dairy aisle, just sort of, in places in the supermarket where only the most dedicated vegans, right, are going to find it out. It's like a treasure hunt, right? You go into a store like, where am I going to find it? This store. It's crazy making, as opposed to where consumers expect to find, a meat or dairy type of product, but actually where meat and dairy is sold. Similar to how, soy milk became hugely popular in the 1990s because it got taken out of, the health food aisle or the baking aisle, and put right next to where cow's milk was sold in similar packaging, right? So that's the kind of activity that we're engaging with, and others have recognized the need for. And so I'm just really excited to say that now retailers are also jumping on board with this idea.
Yes.
And so we're very excited. Pretty soon we'll be able to share some results of a research project that we have collaborated with Kroger on, where we've tested the sale of meat alternatives right in the regular meat department with 60 stores over a 14-week period to be able to show what the uptick in sales would be with that shift. So, I like to think that's sort of our way of leveling the playing field, right? Saying, well, let's put these products right where consumers need to see them, want to find them, and are able to access them.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to riff off of there. I'll just say that when we want plant-based foods to have a level playing field so that they can compete, that goes on to affect everybody in the supply chain. So why shouldn't the grocery store person make more money by having plant-based foods next to meat? Because they also benefit from that. And then when you have more plant-based foods, hiring more people, and we talked about prior how that's a priority to treat their workers well and to give them a fair wage, then all the workers benefit. So contrarily, as you were saying, basically chicken farmers are flat out serfs. So please not only don't believe the humane myth that is on the marketing of the dairy cartons, but also don't believe that the American farmer is this American dream and all barns are red. I mean, the chicken farmer, as you say, is really in an awful business position. And most farms these days are actually corporations, as you mentioned, Tyson and Purdue. it's so frustrating on many levels, and also that our tax dollars participate in all of this as we talk about subsidies during COVID, et cetera. And I love what you're saying, that the Plant-Based Food Association, helps by, hard to take on decades and decades of spending, and these huge lobbies and the government basically being in bed with them. But you're going this other route and coming from the grocery store perspective and the market perspective. And I love that. And I do believe ultimately the market is going to give us all the answers. But I'm wondering if from your position, you're seeing any hairline cracks in the relationship between lobbyists and government for meat and dairy, or because when consumers do shift and spend their dollars elsewhere, at some point the levee has to break. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I would say there's old school and new school. So, there's people who are still stuck in the old way of thinking. And, we see that in some, frankly, mostly southern, sort of middle of the country states where the meat and dairy lobbies, well, the meat lobby, especially dairy, is actually pretty much everywhere in the country. The meat lobby is particularly strong in the middle of the country. And there's still a lot of sort of old school thinking there, just kind of hanging on for dear life to the old ways of doing things. But I think we're also seeing a generational shift happen with younger policymakers, with younger staffers. I can tell you how many times we would show up to, lobby with some member of Congress, and we were almost always meeting with their staff, not the member themselves, because they're just not as available. And the staff person invariably is, young and is very excited to meet with us and says, oh yeah, I'm a big fan of, X, Y, and Z. And it's just a no-brainer for them, and it's just so refreshing. And that's the message. It's like, okay, the next generation totally gets it. And of course, that's what the statistics are showing us as well, in addition to the flexitarian market, particularly younger people are seeing. And what's also exciting about younger people's shift to plant-based eating is it's not just a health driver. Obviously, for them, they're not as concerned about their health yet. For them, it really is much more of a sustainability and environmental motivation. And so, I do think you're right. We're going to see this shift happen over time, and politicians can't just keep digging in their heels, because they got to ultimately answer to the consumer, right? And the consumer wants to see the shift happen.
Yeah, I love it. So we both said that we are very optimistic, and I think we're just a couple dominoes away before things really start to shift and change on a large scale basis. Well, kind of with that in mind, and this new generation who's not only thinking about their health maybe, but that's really kind of the last priority for them. They're really thinking about the future. And how they want their lives and their world to be shaped and what kind of world they'll have. I'm wondering if you have any predictions for what's going to happen in the plant-based food space. I'll say short term, like 3 to 5 years. Where do you see us going?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's just, more growth, right? Things we've been talking about. I think we're going to see definitely increased shelf space. So that's the measure that we use when we think about, what do we want to see in the marketplace. Obviously, we're always trying to introduce our members to more marketplace opportunities. And so what that will look like for the consumer will be no longer.
She's going to come back. Just hold on, folks. Her internet stopped, but she's coming back. Let's just give it a second. She's going to be back. She's coming back. There you go. You're back. Okay,
sorry about that. Technology, right? I was saying, I think what it's going to look like for the consumer is that no longer will these, meat and dairy alternative options be relegated to that sad part of the supermarket where only, a small portion of the consumers will be able to find them, but rather they will be front and center, and we will have more options available. And that will mean ultimately taking away some space from the meat and dairy options. And that is obviously ultimately what we want. We want to see, a shift away from heavily centered meat and dairy centered diet and marketplace to more plant-based options. And I'm convinced that is what the future will look like more and more, whether that's in the retail environment and again in food service. So you'll see menus change. You'll see way more options with your, whatever institution we're talking about, college, university setting, hospitals, you name it. We're just going to see more and more and more, and a shift away from a heavily meat and dairy centered diet towards a plant-based. option.
Yes. And I think it's very interesting because it's hard to take out one leg of a stool and still have a balancing stool. So let's say that this does happen. We both think it will, that there's a shift towards more plant-based eating. People will start to feel better. Sure, there's plant-based junk food. I get it. And I eat it too. But generally speaking, plant-based food options are healthier. Even the junk food options are healthier. And I wonder what that will do. So just everyone feeling better. And a lot of people say that when they shift over to these foods, they have a lot more mental clarity. Wonder what this will do for kids in schools. I mean, I just think the outcome of the changing consumer habits will be very interesting and to see where that goes. So you're going to have to come back and we'll report on that. Particularly also, I want to hear what happens with Kroger. When do you think you'll have that data?
Yes, well, we're on track to release that probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So keep an eye on our website is plantbasedfoods.org, and you can sign up on our mailing list. Obviously, follow us on social, and we'll be very excited to share those very good results.
Yes, everybody. So you have your marching orders. Go to plantbasedfoods.org, sign up on their newsletter. The website is right here, scrolling at the bottom of the screen, plantbasedfoods.org. Check in with them in a couple weeks, see what the outcome is for Kroger moving 60 stores, the plant-based items into their meat and dairy cases, which is so fascinating. My last exit question for you, Michele, is what is your favorite snack?
Yeah. So of course I can't choose any among any of our members because that would be impossible. So I'm actually, yeah, I'm actually just going to go with really. I just love some fresh fruit. So I know it's boring, but I live in California where we have fresh produce year round, and so if it's winter, I like an orange, and if it's this time of year the melons are coming in, that makes me very happy. I love all kinds of berries, so I love a good farmer's market. So that's where I'm the happiest.
That's wonderful. I love to hear it. I love fresh fruit, of course, but I've also just discovered dried jackfruit. So that's my jam at the moment. Michele Simon, Executive Director, founder of the Plant-Based Foods Association. I want to thank you for all you do. You really are defending the good guys, if you will. I mean, you're really out there in front, and you're a leader in that way. So I'm so grateful for all that you do. Plantbasedfoods.org, everybody, to stay up to date with what's going on with the Plant-Based Food Association. Michele, don't go away. For the rest of you, the Plant-Based Business Hour is back on Thursday with a Plant-Based Foods Association member, No Evil Foods. So you want to check in with me on Thursday, 1 p.m. right here. And then tomorrow, it's the Awesome Vegans Influencer Series with Latin lover, plant-based god, Marco Antonio Regil. So you want to be here tomorrow, 1 p.m. for Marco, and then Thursday, 1 p.m. for No Evil Foods. They're so awesome. And until then, thanks everybody for taking back the health of the planet and our own health together. I appreciate it. Michele, stay put. Bye, everybody. See you tomorrow.